I would tell you, I believe the reason it's so hard to live this out is because our anger actually can become an identity that we embrace. And I would tell you right now, in the cultural moment we're living in right now, that's what's happening everywhere. We are more and more and more defining ourselves by our anger, by who we're against, by who our enemies are. And we're doing that everywhere, outside the church and inside the church. We claim an identity based on who we're offended by. It's this identity of being perpetually offended, perpetually triggered, always triggered, and remaining angry because there's, like we were talking about before, there's a sense of control. There's a sense of agency. There's this illusion, this lie that we believe that, man, if I'm just angry, it's going to give me these handles on this situation. I'm going to feel powerful. And so we hold on to unforgiveness. We withhold reconciliation from others, and it becomes our identity. For some of us, for our whole lives. And that's not what Jesus invited us into. So here's a helpful question. I would say this is maybe the most important thing of the whole message. If we could, let's just kind of explore maybe a helpful question to kind of get at, where are we at with this? Go ahead if you could. That next one. No, back up a little bit. There it is. Am I shaped by my enemy or am I defined by my enemy? That's what we're wrestling with. Am I shaped by my enemy or am I defined by my enemy? This is the critical question, the hinge point of whether or not we're allowing our anger to become our identity. Am I shaped by my enemy or am I defined by my enemy? Wrestle with this as you think about that person, as you think about that group of people. What's the difference? Here's what I would say. It's okay to be shaped by your enemy. In fact, I would say all of us are. Whether you want to be or not, we're all shaped by our enemy in good ways and in bad ways. And I would tell you, the wounds that we've experienced, the hard times that we've gone through, the difficulties we've had with other people, if we surrender those things to Christ, He will actually use those things in our life to shape us more and more into His image. It's sad to me how many people will get into a conflict at church and leave the church. It's like, no, there was your best discipleship opportunity right there, and you bailed out. It's better than any Bible study you'll ever do is learning how to work through reconciliation. Are you shaped by your enemy? It's okay, because God can use your enemies, and He does, to shape us into His image. But the question is, if you're defined by your enemy, if your identity has become defined by your enemy and your anger toward them, what I would humbly submit to you today is that you have not understood the gospel message yet. You may have gone to church your whole life, but if you're defined by your enemy, you haven't understood fully really what the gospel is saying yet. And you need Jesus to come in and to heal you and to forgive you and to bring His grace into your life. So how do I know, right? How do I know if I'm defined by my enemy? Two things I would tell you. There are two primary ways that I think people become defined by their enemy. So see if any one of these two fit you. The first way that we oftentimes become defined by our enemy is that we attach our happiness to someone else's unhappiness. Okay? We attach our happiness to someone else's unhappiness. What am I talking about? I'm talking about when you go online and you watch their Facebook or their Instagram or whatever it is, and you're just waiting for some news that they have fallen, that something bad has happened, that you're waiting for your friend to tell you about, oh, did you hear what terrible thing happened? And you're like, no, please tell me. And you celebrate. You're like, yes. Whenever you see something bad happen, then you have attached your happiness to their unhappiness. And the inverse is true too. Whenever something good happens to them and you see it, you're like, oh, it ruins your day. What that is, that's a forgiveness issue in your life. If that's happening in your life, you've attached your happiness to someone else's unhappiness, and you're allowing yourself to be defined by your enemy. That's what you're doing. And Jesus would invite you, He would call you, He would say, there's so much freedom, there's so much life on the other side if you'll just let me help you work through forgiveness for that person. That's the first way. The second way we're defined by our enemy, primarily, is we attach our choices and behavior to someone else's choices and behavior. You've seen this. You've experienced it. If the first was a forgiveness issue, this one is a blame issue. It's the person that says, well, I would love to change that about my life. I would love to act differently. I wish I could. But, because of what they did, I can't. It's too bad that they chose to do what they did, because now this is just the way it is. This is the way I am. I can't change. Okay, you're allowing yourself to be defined by your enemy. That's what you're doing. That's a blame issue, and Jesus wants you to let him have that. Now, why is this such a big deal? Why is it such a big deal that we would not be defined by our enemy? The reason is because what the gospel tells us is that Jesus wants to be the one who defines our identity. Jesus wants to be the one who defines who you are. His love for you, his forgiveness, his grace, who he is, his mercy, that's what he wants to be the thing that defines you. And when you allow Jesus to have complete authority over your life, and you allow yourself, you may be shaped by an enemy, but when Jesus is the only one who's allowed to define your identity, it changes you from the inside out. You're no longer, defined by your anger and who you're against and who your enemy. You're defined by the love of Christ and who he is and what he's done in your life. I would tell you, your identity cannot be defined by both your enemy and Jesus. That doesn't work. I've tried it. It doesn't work. What either happens is either you will allow Jesus to define your identity, and you will come to a place of being able to forgive and live freely in him, or you will come to a place where your enemy defines you more and more, and you will just become more and more angry, more and more defined by what you're against. Do you know any Christians like that? Yeah. This is happening everywhere right now. Jesus says, I want to be the one who defines you. Is it okay to call out evil, corruption? Yeah, of course, Jesus did it. But he calls us to be defined by his love, his grace, his forgiveness, by people who walk in that. And what happens is when we actually live that out and live into that, it changes things in our world dramatically. It's really the only thing that does. When I was 12 years old, I found myself for the first time in my life as the new kid in a middle school. Our family had moved to a new town, and so for the first time I found myself like, I have to figure out how to make friends. I have to figure out how to, being the new kid, and that, especially at that age, is such a time of great insecurity as I look back on my life. And so I remember every single morning I would ride the bus to school. And it just so happened that my house that we lived in was kind of one of the last houses on the bus route. So the bus was packed. So I have this memory. Every morning I would get on the school bus, and there would be hardly any seats left on the school bus. And so I'd walk down the aisle, and it was like, nobody's going to let the new kids sit with them, right? Everybody's just kind of like, nope, sorry, buddy. And I remember this like anxiety producing, like, where am I going to sit? Nobody will let me sit with them. But there was one kid that would always let me sit with him. His name was Chad. And every time I would get to Chad's seat, Chad would always be sitting there. He would pick up his backpack, he would scoot over, and he'd say, yeah, you can sit with me. And so I began to sit with Chad every morning on the bus and began to just kind of develop this friendship with this kid named Chad. What I noticed is when the school bus got to school, we would all get off the school bus. And as we walked off the school bus, what would happen is there would be this group of boys who would gather around Chad. And these were the cool kids. These were all the boys that I wanted to be friends with as the new kid. What would happen is this group of boys would just begin to mock Chad and make fun of him and laugh at him. He was kind of a awkward kid, kind of a nerdy kid. And so again, because this was the group of boys that I wanted to be friends with, I wanted to be known, what I did is I joined in and I began to make fun of him. We did this every single day. I can't even imagine what this kid's life must have been like during those years. I literally have memories of like in the lunchroom. I remember like he would get his tray of food. He would go and sit by himself at a table on purpose, like to be away. And this group of boys and myself, we would pick up our trays, go over to his table, sit down just so we could spend the entire lunch hour just mocking him, laughing at him. Well, what happened is this played itself out every single day. This whole thing, like in the morning, no one would let me sit with him, but every day Chad would let me sit with him. And then we'd get off the bus, and I'd flip, and I'd begin just making fun of him and joining in with this group of boys. And what happened is over a period of time, it started to create this disequilibrium inside of me. It started to create this tension inside of me. And I would tell you, if Chad was retaliating against me, if he wouldn't let me sit in that seat with him, if he was just angry back at me, this tension would have appeared in my heart, in my life. I wasn't a Christian at this point in my life. That disequilibrium, that tension never would have appeared if he would have just gotten angry back. But there's something about that act of letting me sit with him and and allowing me to be there, an act of love every single day, even when I was turning and flipping. And it got stronger and stronger to the point where I didn't like the person I was becoming. And I remember the day when it finally came, where I got off the school bus, Chad and I, just like every day, and that same group of boys gathered around Chad just like they did every single day. And I found I just couldn't do it anymore. Chad remained that awkward kid, but he and I were friends all through high school. See, until you realize that Jesus did that for you, nothing's going to change. You're just going to continue to be defined by your anger and your hatred of your enemy. But when you realize that Jesus, what he did is he didn't just give up his seat, he gave up his life while we were still his enemies, while we were still sinning and living a life apart from God. That's what Jesus did. When you let that into the core of your being, when you let it melt your heart, when you let it transform you, it will change your identity, it'll change your behavior, and it's the only thing I would tell you in our world that has the power to change our world. So, what do we do with that? I was thinking about like application. I was thinking about coming up with some big, here's how to apply this, or here's what to do. But in terms of just taking a next step, for some of you right now, like this is hard. I just thought, let's land with what Jesus invited us to do as a next step. His own words, what Jesus said was just pray for those who persecute you. You know what I love about that? It's so simple. You don't have to like someone to pray for them, do you? You don't have to feel goodwill towards someone in order to pray for them. I would also say, if you're in a situation where you're being abused, where you're being hurt, where truly evil is happening, you don't have to stay in that situation in order to pray for them. In fact, you should put boundaries in place. You should step away. You should get out of any situation like that. You can still pray for that person. You say, well, that's not going to change them. No, probably not, but maybe it will. But the sure thing is it'll change you. So let's do that right now. Would you bow with me? And Carol Ann's going to lead us into communion here in a moment. But before we do that, again, just put that person, that group of people in front of your face. Jesus, we just bring our enemies to you this morning, knowing that you're mighty and powerful to save and to reconcile and to redeem everything in our lives. God, would you use our enemies to shape us more and more into your image? But Jesus, we just right now claim in the name of Jesus that we are defined by none other than your name, than your good for us, Jesus. We are defined by none other than you. We don't want to be defined by our anger. We don't want to be defined by who we're against. We want to be defined by who we are for. And that's you and the gospel. And so would you, to that end, God, would you show us how to love our enemies? Show us how to pray for those who persecute us. To show us how to be different, like you said in your word, to be different than how everyone else is, because we're marked by you. Our identity is defined by you. To that end, God, would you lead us? We ask in Jesus' name. And everybody said.
Hey, thanks for watching this video. We hope you enjoyed it. Hope it made an impact on your life somehow. And if it did, don't forget to like or subscribe or share it on social media with your friends as well. We always love seeing you, and remember that you can join us live every single Sunday. So hope to see you there.